Have you ever met someone who seems to feel everything, every emotion in the room, every subtle shift in energy, and even the pain that others are trying to hide? They're calm, kind, intuitive, and always there for others. But what most people don't realize is that beneath that calm exterior, a super empath may be silently struggling. In this video, we're diving deep into the psychology of super empaths, the ones who absorb more than they show and carry more than they admit. These are the 7 signs a super empath is silently struggling, according to psychology. And if you recognize these signs in yourself or someone you care about, it may be time to check in with your emotional well-being. Let's begin. 1. They feel emotionally drained, but keep giving. Super empaths are the emotional caregivers of the world. They're the friends you call when you're falling apart. The co-workers who sense your stress even before you say a word. The partners who try to heal your wounds, even at the expense of their own. And that's the first sign they're silently struggling. They're emotionally drained, but still feel the need to give. Psychologically, this comes from something called empathic overextension, where an empath unconsciously takes responsibility for other people's emotions. It's not just about caring, it's about absorbing. Over time, this emotional sponge effect leads to chronic fatigue, burnout, and even physical symptoms like headaches or insomnia. Yet they often won't admit how tired they are. Why? Because deep down, super empaths tie their sense of worth to how helpful they can be. Even when they're on empty, they keep pouring into others, unaware, or perhaps in denial, that their emotional gas tank has hit zero. If someone close to you seems supportive and nurturing, on the outside but increasingly exhausted and withdrawn, when no one's looking, they may be a super empath in silent struggle. 2. They struggle to set boundaries without guilt. Boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are necessary. But for a super empath, boundaries can feel like betrayal. This is the second hidden sign of emotional struggle. They know they need boundaries but feel guilty for setting them. You see, psychology tells us that empaths often experience vicarious guilt. This means they don't just feel bad for what others are going through. They feel bad for even thinking of prioritizing themselves. So when a super empath says no, it's not just a boundary, it's a battle between their need for emotional peace and their deep desire to never hurt or disappoint anyone. And because of this inner conflict, they often say yes to things they don't want to do. They stretch themselves thin. They commit to events they don't have the energy for. They stay in relationships that drain them, simply because they don't want to make someone else feel rejected or unloved. But underneath that willingness is a storm of silent suffering. They are constantly suppressing their own needs to meet the emotional demands of others. Over time, this leads to resentment, self-neglect, and in many cases, depression. So if someone seems incredibly accommodating but avoids any talk of their own limits, or shuts down when you ask how they're really feeling, it might be because they're too afraid of being a burden. 3. They feel deep emotions without understanding why. Have you ever felt sad for no reason, or anxious without any clear trigger? Super empaths live in this emotional gray zone far more often than most people. That's because their emotional receptors are always on. They absorb the moods, feelings, and hidden emotions of people around them, often without realizing it. And this is the third sign. They feel things deeply but don't always know where those feelings come from. Imagine walking into a room after someone had an argument. Even if no one tells you what happened, you feel it. The tension, the unspoken anger, the emotional residue. This is what it's like to be a super empath. You're constantly receiving emotional data from your environment, and sometimes it becomes overwhelming. Psychologists refer to this as emotional contagion, the process where one person's emotions trigger similar emotions in another. For most people, this might happen occasionally, but for super empaths, it happens all the time. They might feel heavy and sad after a short conversation with a stranger, or experience anxiety. That doesn't belong to them. It belongs to someone they were recently around. But because these feelings are untraceable, they often blame themselves. They wonder, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel like this? And the silence of not knowing only adds to the internal pressure. 4. They overanalyze every relationship. Super empaths aren't just emotionally sensitive, they're also deeply introspective. This means they don't just feel emotions, they analyze them. And when it comes to relationships, this can become a trap. The 4th sign a super empath is silently struggling is they constantly overthink their relationships, even the smallest interactions. A short text, a cold tone, a delayed response. Where most people might shrug it off, super empaths replay it over and over. They question what they did wrong, what they should have said, or how they might have hurt someone unintentionally. Why? Because they are hypersensitive to emotional shifts, and they often take responsibility for them, even when it's not theirs to carry. Psychologists link this to rejection, sensitivity, and high-trait empathy, where a person is deeply affected by perceived signs of emotional withdrawal or disconnection. They might stay up at night thinking, "Did I upset them? Did I say too much?" And when they don't get reassurance, their mind fills in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. But here's the painful part. They rarely talk about these thoughts. They suffer in silence, afraid of being seen as too needy, too emotional, or too dramatic. And so, the cycle of silent suffering continues. 5. They attract toxic people easily. Super empaths are magnets for both love and danger. That's the 5th sign. They attract emotionally manipulative or toxic individuals without realizing it until it's too late. Their kindness, compassion, and deep empathy make them easy targets for narcissists, energy vampires, and manipulators. Psychologically, this is called the empath-narcissist dynamic, where someone who gives endlessly meets someone who takes endlessly. The empath believes they can heal the other person. The narcissist sees the empath as someone they can control, and the tragedy is, the empath often blames themselves when the relationship turns toxic. They think, maybe I wasn't supportive enough. Maybe I misunderstood them. Maybe it's my fault they're angry. They tolerate disrespect in the name of compassion. They stay in one-sided relationships hoping their love will be enough. And in the process, they lose parts of themselves, bit by bit. Super empaths silently struggle with this cycle of self-blame and emotional exhaustion because their heart is wired to forgive, even when their mind is begging them to walk away. 6. They hide their pain to protect others. One of the most invisible signs of a super empath struggle is their silence. That's right, they hide their pain not because they're fine, but because they don't want to burden others. Psychologically, this behavior is tied to something called protective suppression, where someone suppresses their own distress to maintain harmony in relationships. Super empaths often feel that if they express their pain, they might make others uncomfortable or cause emotional disruption. So they smile while they're breaking inside. They say, "I'm okay," when they're anything but okay. They listen to everyone else's problems, but downplay their own. This quiet suppression leads to emotional bottling, and just like a bottle shaken for too long one day, it bursts. Sometimes this results in anxiety attacks, emotional numbness, or even physical illness. It's important to understand, just because someone appears strong and calm doesn't mean they're not struggling. Super empaths often wear emotional armor to protect others, not themselves. And that armor gets heavier with every unspoken feeling. 7. They lose their identity in the emotions of others. Lastly, and perhaps most heartbreakingly, super empaths often struggle with a blurred sense of self. The final sign is this: they lose track of who they are because they're so deeply connected to how others feel. In psychology, this is closely related to emotional enmeshment, where someone's identity becomes entangled with the emotional states of those around them. Super empaths adapt themselves constantly, adjusting their moods, their tone, even their personality, to match the emotional needs of others. Over time, they forget what they actually feel. They forget what they like, what they need, and who they are when no one else is around. They become so used to mirroring others that they no longer recognize their own reflection. This internal confusion is exhausting. And often, super empaths don't realize how lost they've become until they hit an emotional wall. They wake up one day feeling numb, directionless, and depleted, not knowing how to find their way back to themselves. This is the silent struggle that so few people see. If you've made it this far, chances are you see these signs in yourself or in someone you love. Being a super empath is a gift, but it's also a heavy burden when left unchecked. The truth is, you can care deeply and still protect your energy. You can be compassionate and still set boundaries. You can be present for others and still honor your own needs. Psychology reminds us that empathy is not about self-sacrifice. It's about emotional balance, and balance comes from self-awareness, healthy boundaries, and knowing when to pour into yourself first. So if you are a super empath silently struggling, here's your gentle reminder. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to ask for support. You are allowed to put yourself first without guilt, because healing doesn't make you less empathetic. It makes you stronger, wiser, and more whole. And that's how you continue to be the light in a world that so desperately needs it, without losing your own fire. Thank you for watching. If this video resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need it. Take care of your heart. It's more powerful than you realize.